Good afternoon, everyone. It's Mr. Veron, and I'm going to be sharing with you the solution to the problem of the day from yesterday, March 24th. So remember, the problem of the day yesterday was Terry is making meatballs for a family dinner. She needs ground turkey and ground beef to make the meatballs. Ground turkey costs $4.50 per pound. Terry buys 2.6 pounds of ground turkey. Part A was what is the total cost in dollars for 2.6 pounds of ground turkey. Show or explain how you get your answer. Then it was Terry needs 5.5 pounds of ground beef to make the meatballs. She already has 2.75 pounds of ground beef at home. Part B says what is the total number of pounds of ground beef that Terry needs to buy. Show or explain how you get your answer. And the last part was Terry has a total of 8.1 pounds of meat to make meatballs. She will use 0.3 pounds of meat to make each meatball. Part C was the total number of 0.3 pound meatballs Terry can make with 8.1 pounds of meat. Now, if we look over here, I have quite a few solutions already in place that I worked on yesterday and this morning. So for part A, it's pretty much a multiplication problem. So each pound of meat is going to cost $4.50. And she needs 2.6 pounds of turkey. So we're going to actually multiply 4.50 times 2.6. Now, if we do this with the standard algorithm, we first multiply the 6 by the 0, which equals 0. That's here. Then we multiply the 6 times the 5, and that equals 30. So we put the 0 down. We carry or regroup the 3. Then we do 6 times 4 is 24, plus that 3 is 27. Now, I like to teach my 5th graders that once we move to our new place, we just multiplied the tenths. We're going to cross out the 6, cross out any regrouping that we did, and now we're going to move to the 2, which is in the ones place. Now, when we do that, we also have to put a placeholder in this first place, which is actually our thousandths place. We're going to talk about that in a second. So now I multiply 2 times 0, which is the 0 here, 2 times 5, which is 10, that's the 0 here, and the 1 up top. And I have 2 times 4, which is 8, plus the 1, which is 9. Now I'm going to add up these numbers right here, so I end up with 0. I end up with another 0 here. 7 plus 0 is 7. And then 2 plus 9 is 11. Now, here's the tricky part. We have to figure out where to place the decimal. Now, a lot of teachers will teach you that we count the spaces. So we have 2 spaces in our first number. We have 1 space in our second number, so if we add that up, 2 plus 1, I need 3 spaces in my final answer. Now, what we're actually doing here is we're really multiplying the place value. So if we look here, the $4.50, the 0 goes to the hundredths place, the 6 goes to the tenths place. So when I multiply hundredths times tenths, I end up with thousandths. What that tells me is that the last digit in this number is in the thousandths place. So if I think about a place value chart, I have thousandths, hundredths, tenths, ones, tens, and I know my decimal point belongs between my ones place and my tenths place. So that's why the decimal belongs between those 2 digits. So the total ends up being $11.70 for the ground turkey. Now I also showed this 2 other ways using multiplication. Now this first method is what we call area or grid multiplication. So basically what we did is we separated the $4.50 into its place value, so 4 ones plus 5 tenths, and we separated the 2.6, which was the amount of turkey she needed, into 2 plus 6 tenths. Now at this point, we just multiply each part. So if I have 2 times 5 tenths, it's really half of 2, which is 1. 2 times 4, which is 8. Then I have 6 tenths times 5 tenths, which actually equals 30 hundredths. And then I have 6 tenths times 4 wholes, which ends up being 2 and 4 tenths. Now what I do here is I add up all of these partial products. And when I do that over here, 8 is really 8.00. 2.4, I add a 0 to that, so everything goes to the hundredths place. 1.00. 0.30, and when I add those all up, I end up with my $11.70. The last method that I've shown here is actually called lattice multiplication. Some of you might be familiar with this. So again, we separated the numbers into their parts. So $4.50 becomes 4.5 because you really don't need that extra zero there when we're actually multiplying. And over here, the 2.6 is along the side. And now what I've done is I've drawn diagonals that go across the boxes. What I'm actually doing there is separating my place value. So this is going to become my hundredths place, tenths place, ones, and tens. Now when I multiply, I just do my basic facts. 2 times 5 is 10, so we have the 1 and the 0 there. Then I have 2 times 4 is 8, so that's the 0 and the 8. 6 times 5 is 30, and then 6 times 4 is 24. And now what I want to do is I want to add up these diagonal columns. So 0 is evidently 0. I have 0, 3, and 4, which equals 7. I have 1, 8, and 2, which actually equals 11. So you notice I put a 1 here, and I've carried or regrouped the 1 here. So now 1 plus the 0 is 1. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. You need to pay attention to this. So with decimals and lattice multiplication, what we actually want to do is we want to follow our decimal point in our numbers down to where they meet and then follow that diagonal, and it ends up being right here in between the 1 and the 7. So that's where the decimal point actually goes. And again, if you want to think about it, we're actually multiplying tenths times tenths, which equal hundredths. So that's why this goes to the hundredths place. And again, that gives us the answer of $11.70. Now the second part, I'm just going to change the video camera here around so you can see the whole thing. This is the second part where she needs 5.5 pounds of ground beef, but she already has 2.75 pounds. And we need to figure out how much more does she need to buy at the store. So we can look at this in two different things. So it actually is a subtraction problem. You can also think of it as a bar diagram. So the total that she has is the 5.5. She has this part already, which is the 2.75, and we're trying to figure out this piece. So if we think about it as an addition problem, it'd be this piece plus the 2.75 that she already has equals our total, which is 5.5. Now you notice here I put inverse operation. So in order to solve this, we really got to work backwards. So that's called the inverse operation. We want to do 5.5 minus 2.75 to figure out that missing piece or missing part. So if we look over here, here's the subtraction that I did. Now the important part when we're adding or subtracting decimals is that we actually want to line up our decimal points in our numbers, which means in this case, we actually have to annex a 0. Okay, my class is familiar with that term and most of the 5th grade is. So we're annexing a 0 there because in order to subtract this, we are going to need to regroup, because if I have 0 here, I cannot take away 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to regroup from the 5 here, becomes a 4. And then I'm adding 10 to the hundredths. So I have 10 hundredths now. Now if I have 10 hundredths, I can subtract 5 hundredths, which equals the 5 hundredths here. Now again, if I have 4 tenths, can I subtract the 7 tenths? No, because I don't have enough. So I'm going to have to regroup from the 5 wholes. That becomes 4 wholes. And then I'm going to regroup and add 10 tenths to the 4 tenths I already have, which is 14 tenths. Now 14 minus 7 is 7. And over here, 4 minus 2 is 2. And again, I'm going to bring my decimal point because it stays in the same spot. So the answer becomes 2.75 pounds of beef. Now, part C gets a little tricky. So this, you're going to see a lot of different things here that I have. So this was the last part where she has 8.1 pounds of beef, and each meatball requires 0.3 pounds of meat. So we want to figure out how many meatballs she can actually make with the 8.1 pounds of beef. So this is actually a division problem. Now some of you, especially if you're in 4th grade trying this, you have not done division with decimals. So what we teach our kids in the 5th grade is that when you are dividing, you actually want to turn it into a whole number problem. So if we look here, we have my dividend is 8.1 and my divisor is 0.3. I want to make this 0.3 into 3 wholes. Now how do I do that? I actually multiply it by 10. Now if I multiply this number by 10, in order to get the same answer, I need to multiply this dividend by 10 as well. So we're going to change this to 3 by multiplying it by 10, which is really moving one place over with our decimal point. we're going to do the same thing with here. So instead of this being 8.1, when we move that decimal or multiply by 10, it's going to become 81. Now this becomes a regular division problem. So at this point, if I have 8, how many groups of 3 can I make? 2. 2 times 3 is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. And then we bring down the 1. So this becomes 21. If I have 21, how many groups of 3 can I make? 7. 7 times 3 is 21. And we have nothing left over. So she's able to make 27 meatballs out of this. Now, a lot of you might not know how to divide with decimals, and that's fine. There are other ways in which you can solve this problem. Another way that we can do it is actually by using multiplication. So if you look over here, what I've done is I've taken 0.3 and I've multiplied it by 10, which equals 3.0. Now I've done that once. My goal here is to try to get the amount of meat to equal the 8.1 that I need. So if I multiply by another group of 10, I've now made 20 meatballs, and now I've used 6 pounds of beef. Then I multiply the 0.3 by 5, which is half of the 10. So half of 3 would be 1.5. Now I add that to the 6. Now I'm up to 7.5 pounds of beef, and I've made 25 meatballs. Now I did 0.3 times 1, which anything times 1 is itself. So I've used 0.3. I've added that to the 7.5 I already had. That gets me to 7.8 pounds of beef. And now I've made 26 meatballs. And then I know I can make one more meatball by doing 0.3 times 1. So that's my 27 meatballs. And now here's the key. I've gotten up to the 8.1 pounds of beef that she had. By adding 7.1 plus the 0.3 gets me my 8.1. So 27 meatballs. Now, there's another method I used here using a T-chart. Now, I kind of like this method for those of you that don't know how to divide with decimals. A lot of you do know how to work with doubles. So in this case, what I've done was I know one meatball is 0.3 pounds of meat. So just use a T-chart here. And now I'm doubling the recipe each time. So now 2 meatballs would be 0.6 pounds of beef. Okay, 4 meatballs would be double the 0.6, which is 1.2 pounds of beef. Now I double the 4 to 8, which means I also have to double the pounds of meat. So that becomes 2.4 pounds of meat. And then down here, the last part, I doubled the 8, so that became 16 meatballs. And now I've also doubled the amount of meat that I have. So 2.4 becomes 4.8. Now, how does that help me? Well, I can group these parts together as long as I get the pounds of meat to equal that magic number, which in this case is going to be 8.1, then that should tell me how many meatballs I can make. So I'm going to start off with the largest part because I know with 4.8, I can use that. And that makes 16 meatballs. So that's what you see off to the side here. Now, I'm adding 2.4 to that because I know that's only going to get me to 7.2 pounds of beef. And now that gets me 8 more meatballs that I can make. So I'm at 7.2 pounds of beef that I've used. I've now made 24 meatballs. Now I look at the numbers and say, what else can I add to this without going over that 8.1? So I can add the 0.6 to it. So when I add 0.6 to it, I'm at 7.8 pounds of beef. I've now made 2 more meatballs, so now I'm up to 26. And now I can only add the 0.3 without going over. That gets me to my magic number of 8.1. And that gets me 1 more meatball I can make. And that's 27 meatballs in all. So that's another method that you can use. A lot of kids don't use T-charts, and it's definitely a good thing that you can use where you use patterns to help you figure out the numbers. Now the last one is definitely more time consuming, but it is a way of getting it. It's basically using repeated subtraction because division is basically repeated subtraction. So what I've done here is you can tell I've subtracted 0.3 over and over again until I basically get to 0. And once I do that, you see this column, I've gotten down to 1.5. Then I come over here and I keep subtracting 0.3 until I get to 0. That means I've used all the meat. So I started off with the 8.1. And again, I've worked my way down all the way to 0. Now, in order to figure out how many meatballs you make, well, you just count up how many times you subtracted 0.3. So when I count up all the numbers that I've circled, I end up subtracting 27 times. So therefore, I can make 27 meatballs. So hopefully that helped you guys out with your solving your problem of the day. And I'll be posting today's problem of the day very shortly. Hope you all did well. Bye.